The night of December 14th, 1944, 200 miles northwest of Luzon in the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander Richard E. Harmer sits in the cramped cockpit of his F-6F-5 N Hellcat, watching a green phosphorescent blip crawl across the 5-inch radar scope mounted to his right. The blip represents something Japanese, something hunting for the American carriers below, and Harmer's entire existence has narrowed to that single point of light moving across a circular glass screen that's transforming naval warfare faster than anyone in Washington or Tokyo fully comprehends. His radar operator, seated behind him in what used to be the radio compartment, calls ranges through the intercom. 12 miles, 10 miles, 8 miles. The Japanese pilot out there in the darkness has no idea he's being tracked, no conception that invisible radio waves are painting his position with mathematical precision every 3 seconds. He's flying what Japanese doctrine calls a night reconnaissance mission, searching for the American task force that launched strikes against Manila earlier today. If he finds the carriers, if he radios their position back to Japanese airbases on Luzon, 100 bombers will take off before dawn. But he won't find anything, because in 17 minutes, Richard Harmer will shoot him down in total darkness from 400 yards, and the Japanese pilot will die never knowing what killed him. This is the new mathematics of night warfare in the Pacific. And for the Japanese Navy, which has relied on darkness as tactical sanctuary since Pearl Harbor, the equation just stopped working. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 3 years earlier, December 19th, 1941, 12 days after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay leads a formation of 6 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers off the deck of USS Enterprise in the pre-dawn darkness, hunting for the Japanese submarine that torpedoed USS Saratoga 2 days earlier. It's 4:30 in the morning, pitch black, no moon, the Pacific swallowing every photon of starlight before it reaches the water. Lindsay's formation flies on instruments, trusting primitive gyroscopes and magnetic compasses to keep them oriented, while their eyes register nothing but infinite darkness, punctuated by the faint glow of their instrument panels. They find nothing because finding anything at night in 1941 requires either extraordinary luck or visual contact at ranges measured in hundreds of feet. They return to Enterprise 90 minutes later. Landing by following a searchlight beam, the carrier sweeps across the sky like a lighthouse, then cutting engines and hoping the deck crew catches them with arresting wires they can't see until the moment of impact. 2 aircraft crash on landing. No fatalities, but the message is clear to every aviator in the Pacific Fleet. Night operations are desperately dangerous for the Americans flying them and essentially useless for finding enemy targets. The Japanese, meanwhile, are excellent at it. Better trained, better prepared, and absolutely willing to exploit the advantages darkness provides against an enemy that can't see them coming. The Japanese Navy's night warfare doctrine has been refined through 2 decades of training that emphasizes low-light operations, visual acuity, and the kind of individual pilot skill that American mass training programs don't attempt to replicate. Japanese naval aviators train to attack at twilight and in darkness, using landmarks, star navigation, and their own night-adapted vision to locate targets the Americans can't find without daylight. In the Solomons campaign throughout 1942 and 1943, Japanese bombers attack Henderson Field and American shipping with frustrating regularity after sunset, knowing the American combat air patrols are grounded and the anti-aircraft gunners are firing at engine sounds rather than visual targets. The attacks come from multiple altitudes and directions, exploiting the Americans' inability to track aircraft they can't see. Searchlights sweep the sky in desperate arcs, occasionally catching a bomber in their beams for the few seconds it takes gunners to adjust aim, but more often illuminating nothing but clouds and empty air, while bombs fall from invisible aircraft overhead. American ships fire tens of thousands of anti-aircraft rounds into darkness, statistical barrages thrown at predicted intercept points, achieving occasional lucky hits, but mostly just advertising their own positions through muzzle flashes that Japanese observers can see from 15 miles away. By December 1943, analysis from Pacific Fleet headquarters at Pearl Harbor reveals a disturbing pattern. Over 90% of Japanese offensive aerial effort in the South and Central Pacific occurs at night or during twilight hours when American fighters can't intercept effectively. The Japanese have systematically shifted their bombing campaigns, reconnaissance flights, and anti-shipping strikes to the hours between sunset and sunrise, creating a temporal sanctuary where American air superiority evaporates with the daylight. During the day, American F-4F Wildcats and F-6F Hellcats dominate the Pacific sky with numerical and material advantages that make Japanese daylight operations suicidal. But after sunset, the Americans are as blind as everyone else, and the Japanese press their advantage with methodical determination. This isn't accidental. Japanese doctrine explicitly prioritizes night operations as the equalizer against American industrial capacity. If you can't match the enemy's numbers in daylight, you fight at night where numbers matter less than training and courage. And Japanese naval aviators, selected through brutal screening and trained to fly in conditions American pilots would consider impossible, have both in abundance. The problem facing American commanders in late 1943 isn't identifying the Japanese night advantage. Every carrier task force commander, every island base commander, every ship captain in the Pacific knows the Japanese own the night. The problem is solving it. You can't put more fighters in the air at night because pilots can't see targets in darkness, and night landings on carrier decks are killing American aviators almost as effectively as Japanese guns. You can improve searchlight coordination, but searchlights are defensive, reactive, and easily avoided by competent pilots. You can increase anti-aircraft fire, but shooting at sounds and predicted positions wastes ammunition while achieving hit rates so low they barely qualify as deterrents. What's needed is a way to find enemy aircraft in darkness at ranges measured in miles rather than feet, to track them continuously rather than in glimpses, and to guide defending fighters to intercept positions without requiring visual contact until the final attack run. What's needed is radar small enough to fit in a fighter aircraft, reliable enough to work in combat conditions, and simple enough that a single pilot can operate it while flying and fighting simultaneously. And in late 1943, that radar finally exists. The AN/APS-4, manufactured by Western Electric, represents the miniaturization of technology that previously required truck-mounted generators and antenna arrays the size of small buildings. The radar operates in X-band frequency at 3 cm wavelength, compared to the 10 cm S-band radars mounted on ships and land installations. Shorter wavelength means smaller antennas, and smaller antennas mean the entire radar system can fit in a streamlined pod mounted under an aircraft wing or fuselage. The APS-4's antenna is a 14-inch, parabolic dish that scans mechanically, sweeping a 6-degree cone through 150 degrees of azimuth in search mode, covering 10 degrees vertical. Peak broadcast power varies from 40 to 70 kilowatts, depending on the specific radar version. Pulse repetition, frequency adjustable between 600 and 1000 pulses per second. Detection range for large ships reaches 15 miles in optimal conditions. Against aircraft, effective range drops to approximately 5 miles, less in rain or heavy clouds, more in clear air with a cooperative target that isn't maneuvering violently. The radar displays returns on a 3-inch circular cathode ray tube mounted in the cockpit, showing range and bearing to detected targets as bright spots against the green phosphorescent background. It's not perfect. The small display requires the pilot to divide attention between radar scope and flight instruments while flying in darkness, a demanding workload that's killed several pilots during training when they fixated on the scope and lost situational awareness of their own aircraft's altitude and airspeed. The radar can't distinguish between friendly and hostile aircraft without external confirmation, creating fratricide risks when multiple aircraft operate in the same area. Weather interference, especially heavy rain or dense clouds, can blind the radar or create false returns that waste time and fuel chasing ghosts. And the system requires electrical power, adding weight and complexity to aircraft where every pound matters for performance and carrier landings. But despite these limitations, the APS-4 gives American night fighters a capability the Japanese have no counter for: the ability to detect, track, and intercept enemy aircraft in complete darkness at ranges where visual identification is impossible. It transforms night warfare from a contest of vision and luck into a technical problem with engineering solutions. The Grumman TBF Avenger becomes one of the first operational platforms for airborne intercept radar in the Pacific, not because it's an ideal fighter aircraft, but because it isn't. The Avenger is a torpedo bomber, large and relatively slow, with a 3-man crew and internal volume for radar equipment and operators that single-seat fighters lack. In late 1943, the Navy begins forming specialized night combat air patrol teams, consisting of one radar-equipped TBF Avenger, accompanied by 2 conventional F-6F Hellcats. The Avenger, fitted with AN/APS-4 radar in a pod under the starboard wing, acts as an airborne controller, using its radar to detect Japanese intruders and direct the accompanying Hellcats to intercept positions. The Hellcat pilots fly on the Avenger's wing in loose formation, following radio instructions from the TBF's radar operator who's watching the scope in the dark interior of the bomber. When the radar operator calls ranges and bearings, the Hellcat pilots maneuver accordingly, closing on targets they still can't see until the final moments, when distance shrinks to visual range and muzzle flash illuminates the enemy aircraft. For the half-second, it takes 650 caliber machine guns to destroy it. This team approach works, but it's clumsy, requiring careful coordination between 3 aircraft, precise radio discipline, and Hellcat pilots willing to follow instructions from a radar operator they can't see while flying in darkness with no visual reference except occasional glimpses of the Avenger's position lights. The radar operator in the TBF is directing a fighter he's not flying, estimating intercept geometry on a small scope while the aircraft around him maneuvers, trying to distinguish targets from clutter while calling corrections to pilots who are managing their own demanding workload of night instrument flying. Successful intercepts happen. Japanese aircraft go down in flames in the darkness, but the process feels inefficient to everyone involved. What's really needed is radar, simple enough and small enough that a single-seat fighter pilot can operate it himself, turning the night fighter into a self-contained weapons system, rather than a 3-aircraft team dependent on perfect coordination. Engineers at the Radiation Laboratory and Western Electric work through 1944, refining the APS-4 into simpler variants optimized for single-pilot operation. The AN/APS-6 emerges as a dedicated fighter radar with a simplified 2-inch display that functions essentially as a radar gun sight. Instead of showing the full tactical picture with multiple targets and clutter, the APS-6 focuses on target tracking in intercept mode, displaying range, bearing, and rate of closure for a single target the pilot has already identified. The reduced information density makes it cognitively manageable for a pilot flying alone at night, though it's still demanding enough that only experienced aviators can operate the radar effectively while maintaining aircraft control and situational awareness. By summer 1944, production F-6F-3N and F-6F-5N night fighter Hellcats are rolling off Grumman's production lines with APS-6 radar integrated into the design. The radar pod mounts under the starboard wing, a streamlined fairing containing the antenna and transmitter receiver assembly, connected by cables to the cockpit display and controls. Later variants like the F-4U-4N Corsair and F-4U-5N use similar installations, creating a fleet of carrier-based night fighters that can hunt independently without requiring support from radar-equipped bombers. These aircraft are painted midnight blue or flat black to reduce visibility during night operations, their standard markings subdued or eliminated entirely to make them harder to see against dark sky. Pilots selected for night fighter duty undergo additional training in instrument, flying, radar operation, and the specific techniques required for intercepting targets in darkness when normal visual references don't exist. USS Enterprise, the most decorated carrier in the Pacific Fleet, returns to Pearl Harbor on December 6, 1944, after months of continuous operations supporting the later Gulf landings and subsequent Philippines campaign. The ship has earned 20 battle stars, fought in more major engagements than any other American carrier, and been pronounced sunk by Japanese propaganda 3 separate times, despite continuing to launch strikes that destroy Japanese shipping and airbases. Now Enterprise is being transformed into something unprecedented in naval aviation. The first dedicated night carrier in the United States Navy, designated CV-N-6, with the N representing night operations. Her air group, designated CVG-N-90, consists entirely of pilots trained for night combat, F6, F-5, N Hellcats for fighter protection and interception, TBM Avengers equipped with radar for reconnaissance and strike, all painted dark blue, all crewed by aviators who've spent months training to land on carrier decks in darkness, to navigate by instruments and radar when visual references disappear, and to fight an enemy they'll only see for seconds at a time through gun sights or in the flash of tracer fire. On December 24, 1944, Enterprise stands out from Pearl Harbor as the only carrier in the Pacific capable of sustained around-the-clock warfare. Her mission is to provide night combat air patrol for the Fast Carrier Task Force, to hunt Japanese reconnaissance aircraft and bombers attempting to attack American ships after sunset, and to prove that carrier-based night operations can be conducted routinely rather than as desperate improvisations. The transformation in capability between December 1941, when Eugene Lindsay's pre-dawn patrol found nothing and achieved little, and December 1944, when Enterprise sails with a full air group optimized for darkness, represents technological and tactical evolution on a scale that's changed the fundamental equations of Pacific naval warfare. The Japanese don't know this yet. They know American radar technology has improved, that surface search radars on American ships can detect aircraft at increasing ranges, that Americans have gotten better at coordinating searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. But Japanese intelligence has no indication that American fighters can now hunt independently at night using airborne radar that defeats the darkness Japanese doctrine relies on. That information gap, that disconnect between Japanese assumptions and American capability, is about to prove catastrophic for Japanese night operations. January 1945. Enterprise and her night air group operate as Task Group 38.5, the night carrier group assigned to provide darkness coverage for the Fast Carrier Task Force, conducting strikes against Japanese positions in the Philippines, Formosa, and the South China Sea. The pattern established is methodical. During daylight hours, Enterprise's deck serves as an emergency landing field for damaged aircraft from other carriers that can't make it home, her pilots flying combat air patrol missions alongside conventional day fighters from the rest of the task force. As sunset approaches, Enterprise begins launching her night-configured aircraft. Hellcat night fighters take station in patrol sectors around the task force, orbiting at altitudes between 10,000 and 20,000 feet, radar operators scanning their scopes for contacts while maintaining position relative to the carriers below. TBM Avengers fitted with surface search radar fly wider reconnaissance patterns, hunting for Japanese shipping and covering approaches Japanese reconnaissance aircraft might use. The first kill comes on the night of January 10th. A Japanese Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber, flying at 14,000 feet on a reconnaissance mission to locate the American task force, appears as a bright blip on the radar scope of a Hellcat night fighter flown by Lieutenant William Henry. The contact is 15 miles out, heading directly toward the task force. Henry's radar operator calls the intercept vectors. Come right to heading 270, target bearing 285 at 12 miles. Henry adjusts course, advancing the throttle to increase closure rate. His eyes are divided between the radar scope showing the target's position shrinking and the instrument panel showing his own altitude, airspeed, and heading. Outside the canopy, there's nothing but darkness. No horizon, no stars visible through cloud cover, no visual reference of any kind except the faint glow of his instruments. The radar shows 9 miles, 7 miles, 5 miles. Henry strains to see anything ahead, knowing the target is out there but invisible until he closes to point-blank range. At 3 miles, his radar operator calls for a slight heading correction. Come left 5 degrees. Target now dead ahead at 2 miles. 1 mile. Then Henry sees it, a dark shape marginally less dark than the surrounding night sky. Engine exhausts glowing red. The distinctive twin-engine silhouette of a Betty bomber flying straight and level. Crew completely unaware they're being stalked. Henry closes to 400 yards, centers the illuminated gunsight pipper on the bomber's fuselage, and fires a 3-second burst. 6 50-caliber machine guns erupt, tracer rounds drawing lines of fire across the night sky. The Betty's right engine explodes, fuel igniting in a brilliant fireball that temporarily ruins Henry's night vision. The bomber rolls inverted and falls, tumbling toward the ocean 6 miles below. Henry pulls up and away, his heart hammering, adrenaline singing through his bloodstream. The entire engagement from first radar, contact to kill, took 14 minutes. The Betty's crew never transmitted a contact report. They died, not knowing what found them. This becomes the template for night interceptions throughout January and February 1945. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft and bombers attempt to locate American carriers after sunset, relying on darkness for protection they no longer possess. Enterprise's night fighters detect them on radar at ranges where the Japanese pilots can't see the American ships they're hunting, close to firing range, while being guided by their own airborne radar or by fighter direction officers aboard Enterprise watching ship-mounted radar displays and destroy them before they can report American positions or commence attack runs. The kill ratios are staggering. Between January 1st and March 1st, 1945, Enterprise night fighters shoot down 42 Japanese aircraft with 0 losses to enemy action. Not a single Enterprise night fighter is destroyed by Japanese defensive fire or intercepted by Japanese fighters during this period. 2 aircraft are lost to accidents, pilot error during night landings on carrier decks that remain unforgiving despite improved technology, but Japanese combat effectiveness against American night operations has dropped to essentially 0. Japanese commanders notice. Intelligence reports from surviving reconnaissance crews describe the Americans' uncanny ability to intercept Japanese aircraft in total darkness, to appear out of nowhere and destroy bombers before defensive gunners even knew fighters were present. Some surviving Japanese pilots report seeing no American aircraft until the moment muzzle flashes erupted from empty darkness ahead of them. Others describe being stalked through clouds and darkness by fighters that maintained perfect intercept geometry, despite having no possible visual contact. The reports sound almost supernatural to commanders trained in traditional night warfare, where visual contact at close range was required for successful interception. How were American fighters finding Japanese aircraft in conditions where neither side could see anything? Vice Admiral John McCain, commanding Fast Carrier Task Force, submits a report to Pacific Fleet Headquarters in February 1945 that contains a single line capturing the new reality. The Japanese have made no efforts to attack our forces at night, even though our location was known to them. This represents a complete reversal from 1943, when Japanese night attacks were relentless and American night defenses were nearly non-existent. The Japanese have effectively conceded the night to American technological superiority, abandoning the temporal sanctuary that previously allowed them to attack American forces with impunity. Without night operations, Japanese offensive capabilities shrink dramatically. Daylight attacks against American task forces, protected by hundreds of fighters, are suicide missions with minimal success rates. Japanese naval aviation, already bleeding from losses at Philippine Sea and later Gulf, can't sustain daylight attrition while achieving negligible damage against American ships. The technological gap isn't subtle. American fighters carry operational airborne intercept radar with detection ranges measured in miles. Japanese fighters have no equivalent technology. Japanese radar development lagged throughout the war due to industrial limitations, competing priorities, and the fundamental challenge of miniaturizing vacuum tube technology to fit aircraft weight and power constraints. By 1945, Japan possesses ground-based radar for air defense and surface search radar on some capital ships, but airborne intercept radar remains beyond their industrial and technical capacity to produce in meaningful numbers. Even if Japanese engineers could design equivalent systems to the APS-4, Japanese manufacturing couldn't produce them at scale while maintaining production of conventional aircraft, engines, and weapons. The Americans built thousands of airborne radar sets across multiple variants, The Japanese built effectively none for fighter intercept applications. This industrial reality manifests in combat as Japanese night capabilities evaporate, while American night operations become routine. By March 1945, Enterprise is conducting sustained night combat air patrol for up to 7 days continuously. Aircraft airborne around the clock with only brief weather interruptions, providing defensive coverage and launching strikes against Japanese positions during hours when darkness previously protected them from American air power. Japanese positions that were safe after sunset in 1943 are now vulnerable to radar-guided attacks at any hour. Japanese shipping that previously moved at night to avoid American daytime air superiority now faces TBM Avengers, equipped with surface search radar that can detect ships at 15 miles in total darkness, guide into torpedo release range, and destroy targets the Japanese don't realize are under attack until weapons detonate against hull plating. The radar-equipped TBF and TBM Avengers deserve particular attention in this transformation. While night fighters using APS-6 radar get most of the attention for dramatic intercepts and kill scores, the Avengers, fitted with radar for anti-shipping and reconnaissance missions, represent equally important capability. The AN/APS-4 radar in surface search mode can detect large ships at 15 miles, smaller vessels at shorter ranges, creating tactical awareness that didn't exist in early war period, when finding enemy ships at night required visual contact at ranges measured in thousands of yards at best. An Avenger crew flying at 10,000 feet with functioning radar can sweep hundreds of square miles per hour, detecting shipping, mapping coastlines, identifying harbors, and anchorages, all in complete darkness. When targets are located, the Avenger can either attack directly with torpedoes or bombs, or vector in other strike aircraft, coordinating multi-aircraft attacks against targets the Japanese believe are hidden by night. On February 17, 1944, Enterprise achieved another aviation first when she launched the first night radar bombing attack from a United States carrier against Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands. 12 TBF Avengers equipped with radar struck Japanese shipping in the heavily defended anchorage, achieving results that accounted for nearly 1/3 of the 200,000 tons of shipping destroyed by aircraft during the overall Truk operation. The night attack allowed bombers to approach without being detected by Japanese observers, to locate and identify targets using radar in total darkness, and to release weapons with accuracy that previous night bombing attempts could never achieve. The Japanese defenders at Truk had searchlights and anti-aircraft guns positioned to defend against American air attacks, but those defenses were optimized for visual acquisition of incoming aircraft. Radar-guided bombers attacking from altitude in darkness defeated the defensive system by arriving undetected and departing before effective counterfire could be organized. This capability terrifies Japanese commanders who understand the implications. If Americans can attack any target at any hour using radar to navigate and find targets in conditions where Japanese defenses are blind, there's no sanctuary. Darkness, weather, cloud cover, the natural conditions that previously provided tactical protection and operational flexibility all become irrelevant when the enemy has sensors that work regardless of lighting or visibility. You can't hide ships in darkness from radar. You can't avoid fighters at night when they detect you at 5 miles. You can't plan operations assuming American air power is grounded after sunset, when carrier-based night fighters orbit continuously from twilight to dawn. But understanding the problem and solving it are different challenges. Japanese industry in 1945 is being systematically destroyed by American bombing, shipping is being strangled by submarine warfare, and resources for radar development are scarce, and getting scarcer. Even if Japan could develop equivalent airborne radar, even if Japanese engineers solved the technical problems Western Electric solved, there's no industrial capacity available to manufacture thousands of radar sets while simultaneously building aircraft, training pilots, and supplying frontline forces with basic ammunition and fuel. The technological gap exists because of deeper industrial and resource disparities that Japan can't overcome through tactical innovation or operational brilliance. The War Diary of Commander Air Group Night 90 aboard Enterprise contains an entry from mid-February 1945 that captures the one-sided nature of night warfare in the final months of the Pacific War. Our night fighters have achieved air superiority to such an extent that Japanese aircraft no longer challenge us after sunset. We operate with impunity during hours when, 2 years ago, Japanese bombers attacked our forces routinely. The transformation is complete. The technical capability exists. The operational doctrine has been developed and refined. And the Japanese have no answer except to concede the night entirely and accept the resulting compression of their operational flexibility to daylight hours, when American numerical and material superiority is overwhelming. The mathematics of attrition tell the story more clearly than any tactical analysis. Between January and June 1945, Enterprise night fighters flew 1,473 combat sorties, achieving 163 confirmed kills against Japanese aircraft with only 8 losses to all causes, including operational accidents. That's a kill ratio exceeding 20-1, numbers that would be unbelievable if they weren't documented in official action reports, verified by multiple sources. Compare this to the early war period when Japanese night attacks on Henderson Field and American shipping in the Solomons achieved success rates high enough to force American commanders to develop elaborate evasion tactics, dispersing ships during twilight hours and maintaining strict radio silence to avoid detection. The reversal is total and absolute. Japanese naval aviation staff officers at Combined Fleet Headquarters in Hiyoshi analyze these loss patterns through spring 1945 and reach conclusions that should terrify anyone concerned with Japan's ability to continue fighting. The reports, translated after the war from captured documents, reveal Japanese understanding of their predicament. American radar-equipped fighters have eliminated our ability to conduct reconnaissance or attack operations during darkness. Our losses to night interception have made continued night operations untenable. We must restrict offensive air operations to daylight hours when our pilots can at least see the enemy attacking them. But this concentration of operations into daylight hours subjects Japanese aircraft to the full weight of American fighter superiority, with combat air patrols that can put 200 fighters over a task force simultaneously. Daylight operations that might have succeeded in 1942, when American forces were smaller and less coordinated, become suicide missions in 1945 against an enemy with numerical superiority, better aircraft, radar direction, and 3 years of combat experience. The captured TBF Avenger enters this story not as the central weapon that defeated Japanese night operations, but as a symbol of the technological gap Japanese engineers confronted when they examined American equipment. Japanese forces did capture American aircraft during the Philippines campaign, at various island battles throughout the Pacific, and through forced landings that left relatively intact examples in Japanese hands. These captured aircraft made their way to the Naval Air Technical Arsenal at Yokosuka or the Army Aviation Technical Research Institute at Tachikawa, where Japanese engineers conducted detailed examinations similar to the German program at Rechlin that evaluated captured Allied aircraft in Europe. The Japanese technical intelligence program was sophisticated and thorough, staffed by competent engineers who understood aviation technology and could assess enemy capabilities accurately. When Japanese engineers at Yokosuka examined captured American carrier aircraft, including examples of the TBF Avenger, F-6F Hellcat, and F-4U Corsair, they found technology that was in some ways less refined than Japanese equivalents, but in other ways represented industrial and systematic thinking Japan couldn't match. The Avenger particularly impressed Japanese evaluators as a design that prioritized crew survivability, operational effectiveness, and manufacturing efficiency over the kind of performance optimization Japanese designers pursued. The aircraft was large for a carrier-based type, with a wingspan of 54 feet and loaded weight exceeding 15,000 pounds, making it significantly heavier than Japanese torpedo bombers like the Nakajima B-6N Tenzan. But that size provided internal volume for 3 crew members with adequate working space, defensive armament coverage across multiple positions, armor protection for critical crew stations and fuel tanks, and equipment bays that could accommodate radar, radio gear, and mission-specific equipment. The radar installation in captured Avengers particularly fascinated Japanese engineers who understood its implications, even if they couldn't immediately replicate the technology. The AN/APS-4 radar pod, mounted under the wing, contained components that Japanese industry struggled to manufacture at the quality levels Western Electric achieved routinely. The magnetron generating the radar's microwave transmission operated at power levels and frequencies Japanese equivalents couldn't match with the same reliability. The cathode ray tube display used phosphors and vacuum technology that required manufacturing precision. Japanese factories, operating under constant American air attack and resource constraints, found difficult to maintain consistently. The electrical systems integrating radar with aircraft power, cooling for components generating significant heat, and mechanical scanning mechanisms for the antenna all represented engineering that was simultaneously simpler and more sophisticated than Japanese approaches. Japanese engineers documented their findings in technical reports that acknowledged American advantages in specific areas, while sometimes misunderstanding the systematic nature of American development. One report noted the surprising use of fabric covering on certain control surfaces of the Corsair, interpreting this as cost-cutting that reduced quality, when in fact it represented deliberate design choices, balancing weight, manufacturing speed, and field repairability. Another report praised the Avengers' rugged construction while noting it was heavier than equivalent Japanese designs, missing the point that American designers deliberately accepted weight penalties to achieve crew survivability and damage tolerance that Japanese designs sacrificed for performance. These reports reveal engineers competently analyzing individual design choices without fully grasping the industrial philosophy driving those choices. The radar technology represented the clearest example of this comprehension gap. Japanese engineers could examine captured American radar sets, measure their performance, understand their operating principles, and even attempt to copy specific components. But replicating the complete system, from designing equivalent components through manufacturing them at scale to integrating them into operational aircraft, required industrial capacity and systematic development programs Japan no longer possessed in 1945. American radar development involved coordination between research laboratories like MIT's Radiation Laboratory, commercial manufacturers like Western Electric and RCA, military testing facilities, and operational squadrons providing feedback from combat use. The entire system produced iterative improvements, with each radar variant incorporating lessons from previous versions and new components from improving manufacturing processes. Japan lacked this systematic development infrastructure by 1945. Research facilities operated with limited resources and struggled to obtain even basic materials. Manufacturing plants faced constant disruption from American bombing that destroyed equipment, killed skilled workers, and severed supply chains providing components. Testing facilities couldn't conduct thorough evaluation programs when fuel shortages, limited flight hours, and replacement parts didn't exist for damaged test aircraft. And operational squadrons, desperately short of aircraft and pilots, couldn't provide the kind of detailed feedback that informed American development because Japanese units were fighting for survival rather than optimizing equipment performance. The technological gap existed not because Japanese engineers were less capable than their American counterparts, but because the entire industrial and organizational system supporting development had collapsed under the weight of American material superiority. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. One specific incident from March 1945 illustrates how completely radar had shifted night warfare advantage to the Americans. On the night of March 18th, during the Okinawa campaign preliminary operations, 4 Japanese Yokosuka P-1Y Francis reconnaissance bombers attempted to locate American carrier task forces operating east of Kyushu. These were among Japan's newest and fastest reconnaissance aircraft, capable of 330 miles per hour at altitude, with a service ceiling exceeding 32,000 feet. The crews were experienced, graduates of the Naval Academy or flight training programs that still maintained some standards despite Japan's desperate manning situation. They flew individually rather than in formation, approaching from different directions to increase the probability that at least one aircraft would locate the American ships and radio their position before being intercepted. All four were detected by Enterprise night fighters at ranges exceeding 10 miles. All four were shot down within 30 minutes of first radar contact. None transmitted a contact report. None successfully located the American carriers they were hunting, and the American night fighter pilots who destroyed them did so without ever seeing the Japanese aircraft until the final moments before firing, when distance closed to visual range measured in hundreds of yards. The France's bombers had no warning they were being intercepted until tracer fire appeared from darkness ahead of them. Their crews died professionally, still searching for an enemy they never found, destroyed by a technology they couldn't detect or evade. Japanese operational orders from this period, captured after the war, reveal the desperation this situation created. Units are instructed to avoid night operations unless absolutely necessary. When night reconnaissance is required, aircraft are directed to remain at maximum altitude and minimum time over suspected enemy positions, gathering whatever information they can from long range before withdrawing. Attack missions at night are effectively prohibited, except under specific authorization from Fleet Command, acknowledging that losses outweigh any potential damage to American forces. This represents complete capitulation of the night warfare capability Japan developed through 2 decades of training and tactical refinement. Darkness, which provided sanctuary for Japanese operations from 1941 through 1943, has become a domain where Japanese aircraft are hunted with methodical efficiency by an enemy they cannot see or fight. The human cost of this technological shift manifests in the casualty lists of Japanese naval aviation units through 1945. Reconnaissance squadrons, which bore the primary burden of night operations because someone had to locate American task forces regardless of risk, suffered attrition rates exceeding 70% over 3-month deployment periods. Pilots who survived 10 night reconnaissance missions were considered exceptionally lucky or skilled. Most died on their 3rd or 4th mission, intercepted by radar-guided American fighters they never saw coming. The few who returned from encounters with American night fighters reported the experience as fundamentally demoralizing, describing the helplessness of being stalked through darkness by an enemy who could see them, but whom they couldn't detect until too late to evade or fight back. This psychological dimension matters as much as the tactical one. Japanese naval aviators in early war period believed in their training, their equipment, and their ability to operate in conditions American pilots couldn't handle. Night flying was a point of pride, a demonstration of superior training and warrior spirit that compensated for American material advantages. By 1945, that confidence has been systematically destroyed by repeated demonstrations that American technology defeats Japanese training. No amount of skill or courage matters when the enemy detects you at 5 miles and shoots you down from 400 yards before you know they're there. The best Japanese pilot flying the most advanced Japanese aircraft still dies in the dark, killed by radar he can't see, and fighters he can't evade, because he doesn't know they're there until bullets tear through his aircraft. The final months of the war see Japanese night operations reduced to negligible levels across the Pacific. The Kaiten manned torpedo units, the Kaiten human-guided bombs, and other desperate special attack programs launch from bases at dawn or dusk, timing their approaches for the uncertain light of early morning or late evening when American radar is less effective and Japanese pilots can still see targets. But true night operations, the kind that characterized 1942 and 1943, essentially cease by May 1945. It's not worth the losses. Aircraft and pilots Japan can't replace are destroyed, achieving nothing, while American task forces operate with impunity 24 hours a day, launching strikes at any hour, knowing Japanese countermeasures have been neutralized by technology. The Avengers' role in this transformation was significant, but often overshadowed by the more glamorous night fighter kills. TBM Avengers, equipped with surface search radar, hunted Japanese shipping through the final months of the war, finding and destroying merchant vessels, tankers, and small warships attempting to move supplies between Japanese-held islands. The statistics for these operations are less dramatic than fighter interceptions but strategically more important. Between January and August 1945, radar-equipped Avengers from Enterprise and other night-capable carriers sank or damaged over 200,000 tons of Japanese shipping, disrupting supply lines and accelerating the isolation of Japanese garrisons across the Pacific. Each successful shipping strike represented fuel that didn't reach Japan, food that didn't feed Japanese troops, ammunition that didn't reach frontline units. The cumulative effect was strangling Japanese forces through systematic interdiction that darkness couldn't protect against. One Avenger pilot from VT (N-90), Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Cosgrove, kept a detailed diary of his night missions that was published after the war. His entries from April and May 1945 describe the routine nature of radar-guided night attacks, the methodical process of searching for targets on the scope, identifying contacts, approaching for verification, and attacking when positive identification confirmed enemy vessels. We found a convoy at 0200 hours, 3 ships in column, proceeding northwest at about 8 knots. Radar showed them clearly from 12 miles out. We approached from the stern, identified them as small freighters or transports through binoculars once we closed to 1,000 yards. I attacked the lead ship with a torpedo from 800 yards, hit forward of amidships. The ship was on fire and sinking when we departed the area 20 minutes later. The entire mission took 4 hours from launch to recovery, and we landed aboard ship in total darkness, using only the landing signal officer's wands and the carrier's faint flight deck lights as reference. 2 years ago, what we did tonight would have been considered impossible. That phrase appears repeatedly in documents from this period. What seemed impossible in 1943 had become routine by 1945 through technological development and operational refinement. Night landings that killed pilots regularly in early war period were now conducted with acceptable safety through improved lighting, better training, and the confidence that came from hundreds of successful recoveries. Night intercepts that required elaborate coordination between multiple aircraft and ship-based controllers were now executed by single pilots operating independently with onboard radar. Night strikes against shipping that previously achieved minimal results due to target location problems now destroyed Japanese vessels with precision that daylight attacks would envy. The transformation was comprehensive and decisive. Japanese admirals and senior officers understood what had happened, even if they couldn't counter it effectively. Post-war interrogations of captured Japanese naval officers reveal sophisticated understanding of American technological advantages and realistic assessments of Japan's inability to close the gap. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet during the Okinawa campaign, wrote in his diary about the hopelessness of conducting operations against an enemy with radar superiority. The Americans detect our aircraft before we can locate their ships. Their fighters intercept us using devices we cannot see or counter. Our losses mount while our successes diminish to nothing. We continue operations because honor demands we fight, but effectiveness has become negligible. This from an admiral commanding one of Japan's most important air fleets, acknowledging openly in his personal diary that continued operations were essentially futile against American technological superiority. Other captured documents reveal similar assessments throughout the Japanese naval command structure. A staff study from Combined Fleet Headquarters in June 1945 analyzed the night warfare situation with brutal honesty. American radar technology has eliminated our operational flexibility in the night warfare domain. We cannot conduct reconnaissance without prohibitive losses. We cannot attack their fleet at night. We cannot protect our shipping from their night attacks. The tactical advantages we developed through years of training have been neutralized by technology we cannot produce or counter with available resources. The study recommended focusing Japan's remaining aviation assets on daylight, special attack operations, where at least some portion of attacking aircraft might reach American ships before being destroyed, acknowledging this represented acceptance of unsustainable attrition in exchange for any damage at all. The irony is that Japanese technology wasn't primitive by global standards at war's start. Japanese radar research began in the 1930s, parallel to American and British programs, and by 1941, Japan possessed ground-based radar for air defense and some shipboard installations for surface search. But Japanese radar development never achieved the miniaturization necessary for effective airborne applications in fighter-sized aircraft, partly due to industrial limitations and partly due to strategic decisions that prioritized other technologies. Japanese designers focused on optimizing aircraft performance through weight reduction and aerodynamic refinement, making their fighters among the most agile in the world, but leaving little margin for the weight and power requirements of onboard radar. American designers accepted performance penalties to incorporate radar, armor, and other equipment that enhanced survivability and effectiveness, creating aircraft that were individually less agile but systematically more capable when operated as part of an integrated warfare system. By 1945, this systematic American approach to warfare had defeated Japanese emphasis on individual excellence and tactical skill. The best Japanese pilot couldn't overcome radar guidance, couldn't evade fighters directed by technology that worked regardless of visibility or lighting conditions, couldn't locate and attack targets defended by radar-directed combat air patrols operating continuously. And Japan's industrial base, devastated by American submarine warfare strangling raw material imports and American bombing destroying factories, couldn't produce the technology needed to close the gap, even if Japanese engineers had designed equivalent systems. The end came in August 1945, with atomic weapons dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Soviet entry into the war, forcing Japanese surrender. But the war had been lost months earlier through systematic destruction of Japan's ability to conduct effective military operations. Night warfare capability was just one dimension of this defeat, but it illustrated the broader pattern. American technology, applied systematically and supported by overwhelming industrial capacity, defeated Japanese tactical excellence and warrior spirit. The mathematics of modern warfare favored the side that could build better sensors, integrate them into effective weapons systems, train operators to use them competently, and deploy them in numbers that overwhelmed any defense. Japan couldn't match any dimension of this equation by 1945, and the result was inevitable. The captured Avengers, examined by Japanese engineers at Yokosuka, taught lessons about American manufacturing and design philosophy, but those lessons came too late to matter. Understanding American advantages didn't create the industrial capacity to match them or the time to develop counters before defeat became unavoidable. The radar pods under Avenger wings represented not just technology but the entire American system that produced them, from research laboratories developing new components to factories manufacturing them at scale, to training programs, teaching operators how to use them effectively. Defeating that system required resources and time Japan didn't possess. Enterprise continued night operations through the war's final weeks, her air group flying missions until August 14th, when news of Japanese surrender reached the fleet. The carrier's night fighters never lost air superiority after achieving it in early 1945. Japanese aircraft occasionally appeared on radar scopes through the war's final months, but successful intercepts became so routine they warranted only brief mentions in action reports. Shot down one enemy reconnaissance bomber at 0300 hours. Pilot uninjured, returned aboard at 0415 hours. End report. The drama had become mundane through technology and practice. Post-war analysis by American naval intelligence concluded that radar-equipped night fighters and attack aircraft shortened the Pacific War by eliminating Japanese ability to conduct operations after sunset, compressing their operational flexibility into daylight hours, where American numerical and material superiority was overwhelming. The specific number of months or lives saved by this capability is impossible to calculate precisely, but the strategic impact is undeniable. American forces operated continuously while Japanese forces were restricted to partial days. American commanders planned operations knowing their ships and aircraft were protected around the clock by radar-guided defenses. Japanese commanders accepted that any movement, any operation, any attempt to locate American forces would cost aircraft and pilots without achieving proportional results. The technology continued evolving after the war. Radar systems became smaller, more reliable, more capable. The APS-6 gave way to improved variants with better resolution, longer range, and easier operation. Jet fighters incorporated radar from initial design rather than as added equipment. By the Korean War, night fighting had become a routine mission rather than specialized operations requiring dedicated squadrons and unique aircraft. And in Vietnam, radar-guided missiles eliminated the need for visual contact entirely. allowing fighters to destroy targets at ranges measured in tens of miles rather than hundreds of yards. The evolution traced a clear line from the crude early systems that Enterprise's pilots used in 1945 to the sophisticated sensors modern fighters carry today. But the fundamental principle established in the Pacific between 1943 and 1945 remains unchanged. The side that can see first, detect at longer range, and guide weapons accurately in conditions where traditional human senses are degraded will dominate warfare. The Japanese learned this lesson through bitter experience, losing first their night warfare advantage, then their ability to conduct any operations without prohibitive casualties, then finally their capacity to continue fighting at all. The Americans learned it through technological development and systematic application of engineering solutions to tactical problems, transforming warfare through sensors that defeated darkness, weather, and distance. The captured TBF Avengers that Japanese engineers examined became artifacts of this transformation, physical evidence of the technological and industrial gap that decided the Pacific War's outcome. The radar pods under their wings, the displays in their cockpits, the systems integrating sensors with weapons and crew stations, all represented American capability that Japan recognized but couldn't replicate. The admirals and engineers who studied these aircraft understood what they meant for Japan's strategic position. They admitted, in captured documents and post-war interviews, that radar had made night attacks obsolete as effective Japanese tactics. Not because night operations were impossible in principle, but because American technology had seized the advantage so completely that continued Japanese night operations achieved nothing except additional losses Japan couldn't afford. That admission, that acknowledgement of technological defeat by officers trained in warrior traditions that emphasized spirit and will over material factors, represents the Pacific War's verdict in miniature. Japan had started the war believing superior training, tactical excellence, and fighting spirit could defeat American material advantages. By 1945, systematic American application of industrial capacity, and technology had proven otherwise across every dimension of warfare. Night fighting was simply the dimension where technology's victory was most absolute and undeniable. The darkness that once protected Japanese operations became the domain where American sensors worked best, and Japanese countermeasures failed completely. And when that happened, when even darkness couldn't provide sanctuary, the end was inevitable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.